of the Russian Federation, who now engage in some operations in Syria at the request of the Syrian government, get in touch and establish channels of communications to avoid any unintended incidents. And we agreed that the military should get into contact with each other very soon. Number two, we also discussed what the President told us about the promoting political process. We all want Syria democratic, united, secular, Syria which is a home for all ethnic and confessional groups, whose rights are guaranteed, but we have some differences as for the details on how to get there. But we agreed on some steps which we will undertake very soon, and our experts would undertake very soon, together with other countries, including the United Nations, on creating the conditions for options to be used, to be applied, to promote the political process. And I believe that this meeting, as a follow-up to the discussions between the two presidents, is a very useful occasion to promote constructive and safe approaches to the situation in Syria and around it. We agreed to remain in touch with John, and as always, we are available for contacts with each other. Thank you very much.
Well, Sergei has described the meeting that we had, which we would both concur was a constructive meeting. I relayed and reiterated the concerns that I expressed in the course of the UN Security Council meeting, which was led by Russia today. Concerns that we have, obviously, about the nature of the targets, the type of targets, and the need for clarity with respect to them. And it is one thing, obviously, to be targeting ISIL. We're concerned, obviously, if that is not what is happening. So, as Sergei said to you, we agreed on the imperative of as soon as possible, perhaps even as soon as tomorrow, but as soon as possible, having a military-to-military deconfliction discussion, meeting, conference, whatever can be done as soon as possible, because we agree on the urgency of that deconfliction. Secondly, we did discuss a number of different ways to try to address the conflict itself. And several options were agreed to be further discussed. I need to take those back to Washington, to the President and to our team, and I'm sure Sergei will likewise discuss them with President Putin and his team, and we will follow up on that for certain, because we also agreed that it is imperative to find a solution to this conflict and to avoid escalating it in any way or seeing it intensified by forces beyond anybody's control. And finally, the foreign minister and I agreed that there is, even as we don't have yet a resolution with respect to some critical choices in that political solution, we think we have some very specific steps that may be able to help lead in the right direction. That needs to be properly explored, and so we finally agreed we have a lot of work to do, and we're going to get to doing that work as rapidly as possible, understanding fully how urgent this is in the context of refugees flowing out, the impact on Europe, the impact on the region, and understanding also that we need to see Syria kept whole, unified, secular, democratic, and those are big agreements in that regard, and now we need to work on getting there. So we will stay in very close touch and continue to work on this. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
John Kerry, the Secretary of State, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, making statements, refusing to answer reporters' questions following their meeting behind closed doors. They both clearly trying to put their best face forward in the face of a very tough situation. Today, Russia launching airstrikes against various targets in Syria, airstrikes the U.S. was not very happy about, but now Sergei Lavrov saying the meeting was very useful and constructive. Says that there are some steps to try to achieve some progress politically in trying to deal with Syria. John Kerry saying that he's got to go back to Washington and bring these issues to the president and other officials. Elise Lavitz, our global affairs correspondent. Elise, they tried to put a positive spin on what's going on. Behind the scenes, though, everything I'm hearing, there's deep U.S. concern over what the Russians did today.
Very much so, and also concerned that, John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov have been trying, Wolf, for weeks to try and get this political process together. Obviously, the Russians have their support for Assad, but Secretary Kerry was supposed to bring along the Saudis, the Turks, the anti-Assad crowd into some kind of general, larger diplomatic process where you could try and get something going. The U.S. knew all the well that, the Russians were building up their military on the ground, but what Secretary Kerry was hoping was that if you could put that in the context, what the Russians say was an anti-ISIS campaign, in the larger context, in parallel of trying to get some kind of political transition, that you could go after ISIS and you could also try and calm the very fragile political situation on the ground. Now, clearly, what the Russians have done in the last 24 hours has really changed the reality on the ground, Wolf. What U.S. officials who say that Russia is really trying to dominate the airspace, not only the airspace, but also become the force on the ground that is dictating the agenda, and that makes the U.S. very uncomfortable.
Elise, stand by. Happening now. Breaking news.